Welcome to Global Connections on ThinkTech Hawaii. I'm your host, Jay Fidell. Today, we'll talk about examining the tariff deals Trump has made. What are the terms and implications of those deals? Our guests for the show are Ralph Winnie of the Eurasia Consortium. He's a trade lawyer, international trade lawyer in Washington, and Jeff Portnoy, senior partner of Cade, Schutte, Fleming, and Wright here in Honolulu, who is very familiar with international matters and who has appeared on a number of our talk shows. Welcome to the show, both of you. We need to follow U.S. trade policy and the deals Trump has made on the imposition of his tariffs. So it's important that we examine the terms and implications of those deals. So the first question I want to put to you, Ralph, what's the ultimate purpose of these tariffs? Are they needed? Are they needed for the country?
I think the ultimate purpose of the tariffs is to encourage countries to make sure that their companies do business in the United States, that they will invest in products, services in the US and reshore operations from overseas back into the United States. And when Trump ran as a candidate, he ran as not a politician or a diplomat, but as a businessman, as a deal maker. What can you do for me? And these tariffs are a test of Trump's ability to get countries to come to the negotiating table.
So there's an article by David Sanger in the New York Times indicating that Trump's style of negotiation was to ask for the moon and then try to negotiate something less. And that has been consistently reflected in what he's done.
Right.
Let me ask you, Jeff, is this good policy? Is it legal policy?
Well, those are two different questions. Let's start with is good policy. I think history shows that it's a bad policy based upon false premises. 100 years ago, 50 years ago, and today, as we can see every night when Trump gets up in the middle of the night, he decides to change his tariff policy as he did this morning, now threatening the European Union with 25% tariffs. 50% tariffs, threatening Apple now with 25% tariffs. So you see how effective his negotiating style is. It worked when he's negotiating with low income renters, but it's not working when he's negotiating with foreign countries. Is it legal? Yeah, it is legal, although there is a debate as to whether Congress has to have a position in this. And I think at some point that may or may not be litigated. But right now, the problem is that despite his constant promises and texts and emails and public statements about 130 countries coming to their knees, no one has.
Let me go to you, Ralph. There have been so many changes. It's every day there's another change. And I remember in the Rose Garden, he had this chart of 100 of your favorite countries, and they were all different. And the press was saying there's no basis for this calculation. It's throwing it on the wall. So how can you defend? Does he defend all these changes? It's up, it's down, and then it's on a pause. This is chaotic in the sense that you don't have any predictability. How do you defend that?
Well, he's changing the status quo. It's never been done before. And this 90-day period, I think, is key to see exactly what he can accomplish. He was able to bring the Chinese to the negotiating table a second time to reduce the tariffs 145% to 30 for the US, 145% to 10% for China. And they could go even lower. And I think that is a major milestone for right now. The other thing he has done is there's an agreement between the US and the UK on May 8th. Donald Trump and Keir Starmer announced an agreement on the general terms of the economic prosperity deal between the US and the UK. Although not a binding agreement, it does establish a framework to enhance economic cooperation and promote reciprocal trade between the two countries.
Let me stop you there and ask Jeff about that. The press has said that these are framework agreements. They're just an outline of agreements to follow. There are essentially no final agreements on anything in either the UK agreement ostensible agreement or the China agreement. Where does that fit? Are these really agreements, or are these just an opportunity for Trump to say that he was able to cut a deal of some kind?
I don't think anybody has seen a formal deal. I mean, he keeps making announcements on these two occasions that were just mentioned of deals. But the reality is that there's so much uncertainty. The stock market is back in free fall. The bond market is in absolute free fall. Consumer prices are at the highest they've ever been and will continue. And the false premise is that companies like Apple are going to move back from China or Vietnam and are going to build multi-billion-dollar factories in the United States. One, it's not going to happen. And I think most economists agree. And two, if it does happen on an occasional basis, it won't be in any of our lifetime.
Have we seen any sign of that? I mean, Ford Motor Company said they were going offshore. The Apple company said they were going to go to India for their manufacturing. There doesn't seem to be any indication of reshoring just yet. What is the problem here? We've been up and down and all around on these tariffs, and they've been headlines now for months. So, query: what kind of reshoring result do we have? And let me ask you also: are there any other deals aside from this Chinese deal and the UK deal? Are there any other deals at all? One of the reasons the paper said that Trump had increased the UK. I'm sorry. One of the reasons the paper said that Trump had increased the EU tariff to 50% today was that he wasn't getting any response from anybody in the EU, and he was trying to get them to the table by increasing the level of tariff. So my question is, what effect has he had so far in terms of reshoring and in terms of other deals aside from these quote framework deals in the UK and China?
Companies have committed to reshoring. And with the last show that I was on with you, we discussed, I gave you a list of some companies like SoftBank, NVIDIA, and others that had committed to engaging in offshore, to bringing in their operations back into the US, into Indiana and Ohio for manufacturing. Yeah.
NVIDIA was present in Saudi Arabia,
Yeah.
or was it Qatar? And when he was on his trip, and they made a deal with United Arab Emirates for billions, if not trillions, of dollars of American top level chips to go into the Middle East, to go to United Arab Emirates in some kind of partnership agreement, where United Arab Emirates would pay billions and billions for these chips to NVIDIA. And I mean, if you're saying that this is supposed to encourage NVIDIA to do American manufacturing, I really wonder about that, because this is a partnership in which all the funding, in fact, the partners coming from outside the country. Are you including the NVIDIA deal when you say that Trump has some kind of commitment from NVIDIA to manufacture in the United States?
Promoting artificial intelligence.
That's what it's about.
I mean, the idea is to bring the money into the United States, and that's why he went to UAE, Saudi Arabia, to talk and push forth these deals that would be a win-win for the U.S. and the Middle East, and it would isolate Iran, and it would shore up the U.S.'s strong role in the Middle East.
Jeff, by the way, do you have any comment on these other deals? As far as I know, no other deal has been cut, no framework deal. There were discussions with Vietnam and Japan, but that's just discussions. And we only have this framework arrangement with the UK and China. What's your thought about the status of this initiative?
I think it's all illusion. I think it's a magic act, and at some point the rabbit's going to die. And I just think it's clear tariffs have never worked. I mean, I'm not an economist, but all you have to do is read what the most prominent economists in the country keep saying about these tariffs. They don't work. And Trump can threaten and buy out and make deals that benefit he and his family, like just happened in the Middle East. And you can continue to, brag about what you've done. But when you look at the reality, he's done nothing positive. I get back to the stock market, the bond market, consumer prices, his threats against companies like Walmart, that if you don't go along with this, if you raise your prices, I'm going to do some horrible things to you. Well, okay. I mean, what do you expect Walmart to do? Prices rise and consumers pay. That's been the history of tariffs. Now, whether there's a trade imbalance, which, some economists talk about as justifying some modest tariff improvement, that's up for debate about the trade imbalance and how we got there, particularly with a country like China. But he keeps going on, well, if it's worth $50 or less, it's a 5% tariff. If it's $500 or less, it's a 30% tariff. If it's this kind of product, it's a complete shambles, not thought out, spur of the moment. Today is a perfect indication. He wakes up in the middle of the night, as I said earlier, and decides to post a policy. That's not the way you deal with trade policy.
Ralph, you want to respond to that?
Well, I can tell you out of Saudi Arabia, Data Vault is moving forward with plans to invest 20 billion in AI data centers and energy infrastructure in the US. In the healthcare sector, Shemek 4 Solutions will be investing 5.8 billion.
You're coming up with this stuff, but
Yeah.
people, the press is saying there are no written agreements and the details have not been released. What is your thought about that? We've only seen in the newspaper that there are these soundbite expressions by the administration, but we don't know what the deals are. Your thoughts?
Well, the deals are being announced. The question is how long will it take for everything to be consummated? And that's why I keep talking about the 90-day period in order to see how the deals are going to be consummated.
Yes, let's talk about the 90-day. Ralph, can you explain the pause? Why the pause? This is 90 days is a long pause. What's supposed to happen during the pause? And more interestingly, what's supposed to happen after the pause? Can you give us a handle on that?
During the 90-day period, the idea is to allow time for people to come, companies, countries to come to the negotiating table and to create the framework.
That was not the original plan. The original plan is he just laid the tariffs on everyone, and he didn't talk about a pause or a period where people could evaluate what they were going to do. The pause only came out when people, gave him feedback and pushed back on what he had originally proposed. It seems like to me and the press in general, the media in general, that the pause was because he wasn't making any headway. Am I right?
Well, the pause is to create, as I said, to create the ability for the deals to become consummated, for the country, for the trade deals between the U.S. and these countries to become finalized, and then we'll see what happens at the end of the 90 days. I was
Jeff,
listing companies in Saudi Arabia that had made the commitments to put the money into the United States. And we will have to see after the 90-day period where they are. It doesn't happen overnight. It can take a long time. It could blow up in Trump's face, absolutely. Or if everything works out, it is a boon for the United States and for the American people.
is there a connection, Ralph, between the fact that both the Saudis and the Qataris agreed in the same discussion to spend collectively over time $1 trillion on American weapons? You think there might be a connection?
I suppose there could always be a connection. The idea would be to isolate Iran and to send the message that the Middle East is on board with the United States and they want to denuclearize Iran. I'm sure that's a possibility.
Hmm. Okay, Jeff, your thoughts about the pause?
Well, it's like everything else he does. He's impetuous. He says things without talking to people in the middle of the night. What's obvious, I don't know how many days into the so called pause we are. We don't have one single signed, confirmed trade agreement. The closest might be with China, and even that's not done. The European countries have laughed in his face. Most nations are laughing at Trump and these so called tariff issues. And you brought up the Middle East. What's the quid pro quo? You've alluded to it. Yeah, okay, we'll put $5 billion into a factory 5 years from now, and you give us $1 trillion worth of military aircraft. Meanwhile, what do you and I do when we go to Walmart? What do you and I do when we need a product that's still all manufactured outside of the United States? Well, we pay more. So we give them $1 trillion in military equipment. They put a $5 billion factory, maybe somewhere in the United States. So again, this is all a giant illusion at the moment. There is very little, if any, proof of anything positive. I don't know how many days are left in the 90 days, but you know what? I can predict nothing is happening in the next week or two unless Trump comes up with some more threats against our allies and against our trading partners.
Well, do you think the increase to 50% on the EU is going to accelerate negotiations with them?
No, I think it's just Trump. This is the way he did business for his whole life. It's my way or no way. It's my way, even if I'm sued in court, even if I continue to lose. He's a bully.
You know, Ralph, although Elon Musk seems to be out of the inner circle these days, the fact is that he told us early on that we would suffer pain. We would suffer economic pain through his efforts at dismantling all these agencies and programs. But cheer up, at the end of 2 years, he said, we were going to be in great shape. And there's a very interesting parallel here because Trump is really saying the same thing. You're going to have pain. You're going to have inflation. You're going to have supply line disruptions. You're going to have nothing on the shelves, but cheer up. After that pain, within 2 years, and I think it's the same period of time they're both talking about, everything is going to be beautiful. Ralph, can you describe how that works? How we get from pain to the best economy we have ever had?
Well, I guess you're saying he's talking about short term pain for long term gain. The bottom line is he has to consummate these trade deals. The money has to start coming back into the U.S. and people have to feel like they are prospering in the society. If they don't, they are going to send a message very loud and clear at the ballot box next year.
Are you suggesting that that if, for example, just for example, the EU doesn't make any deals, which Jeff has expressed that thought, and I would too. If the EU doesn't want to make any deals, then you don't get to a beautiful economy. That the pain doesn't go away. That at the end of whatever period you hope to achieve a beautiful economy, we don't have a beautiful economy. It is therefore the fault of the EU. Is that what's happening here?
It remains to be seen whether the EU is going to come to the negotiating table. The last time I was on the show, it was unclear whether China was going to come to the negotiating table. China did. Maybe the EU comes to the negotiating table. Maybe they don't. But it's a test of Trump's ability as a deal maker, as a negotiator. That's what he ran on. If he does not produce results, as you and Mr. Portnoy have indicated, then the American people are going to send a message loud and clear that they are not happy. However, if what he is doing in changing the status quo results in billions of dollars coming into the United States, growing and supporting domestic industry, and people have money in their pocketbooks and can spend, it's a win-win for Trump and the Republican Party.
Well, the probabilities are really do not favor that. Jeff, do you have any response on the likelihood of that result?
Nobody has a crystal ball, but we can only see what's happened in the 60 days plus that he started this tariff war, which so far has been one sided. And America has taken a bunch of casualties. I'm talking about the public. I'm talking about the public markets. I'm talking about consumer confidence. And don't forget, when he first announced these things in a joke map that he had on, where he put tariffs on islands that only had animals, I mean, that just showed you how much thought he and his so called inner circle gave to this thing. And remember what he said in those first few weeks. He said nothing about pain. He said nothing about short term problems, nothing. It's when prices started to go, the market dropped 25%, and people around him said, "Hey, Donald, stop using your superlatives and talks a little bit of reality." So he comes out and said, "Well, there'll be some short term pain." Well, that's right. But is it short term? I don't know. All I ask is, and I'll ask Ralph, show me where tariffs have worked in the last 150 years. They don't. We had a free trade economy. If factories left the US, it wasn't because of tariffs, it was because we were not willing to invest in our own country because other countries had cheaper labor, and you can make products cheaper overseas and sell them cheaper in the United States. So you think by saying a country that's able to do that, Vietnam or China, just to use two for an example. Well, we'll teach you a lesson. We'll make it so your cheaper products can't come into our country. So people will have to buy our products, which are going to be a lot more expensive, or your products, which are going to be a lot more expensive. I mean, again, I'm not an economist. I've done a little reading. Ralph, when have tariffs worked? Go back to Haley Smoot.
If you look at Trump's first term, when he had targeted tariffs on China, after he left office, the Biden administration, which is no fan of the Trump administration on many levels, just felt that the Trump tariffs on China were beneficial to the United States and kept them on, and even added additional tariffs on China, focusing on EV vehicles.
I think that isolated tariffs on specific products with specific countries that are well thought out by people who have gone to college, not because their father could afford to send them and bought them into the college, sorry for that, but economists across the United States and across the world. Yes, I don't object to the theory of targeted tariffs on targeted countries for targeted products, but not this just sweeping aside and saying we're putting 135% tariff on everything you make and ship to the United States. That doesn't work.
In terms of China, one thing I want to mention on China is that Trump imposed on them a tariff. I'm trying to remember the exact number. I think it was 145%, which is a deep breathing exercise, which way, way more, multiples more than what then existed in terms of tariff, the Biden's tariffs. And then when he sat down with this framework discussion with the Chinese, he reduced it in a matter of days to 30%. It's a fraction of 145%. It's a small fraction. Now you really wonder what was going on there. He was looking for a result, in my opinion. He was looking for a result that he could announce to the world that he'd cut some kind of preliminary deal with China. And that was the only deal they made. The rest was left for the future. But and this goes to David Sanger's article in the Times. He was asking for the moon, and in short order, he went to 30%. So query, what kind of a negotiation is that? Can we expect to see that, for example, in Europe, where you start with 50% and you wind up with 5%? It's hard to figure out what's going to go on, either on the plenary level that Jeff is talking about, or on the individual country level when you ask for the moon that way. Ralph?
Well, and that's the whole point of the tariffs, is to bring the countries, the EU, to the negotiating table. So you can lessen the tariffs and you can create the framework for a trade deal.
This goes directly to the problem with Canada. He's alienated Canada forever. There are people in Canada that will not speak his name, will not buy American products, will not come to the US. They're absolutely furious at what he has done, not only in terms of the tariffs, although that's central, but in terms of his wild idea to make Canada the 51st state. And so, in terms of our relationship with Canada, it's broken. A lot of Canadians will never, They feel that it is broken permanently. And some of these other countries, maybe all of the EU at this point, are really, in another place. They no longer see the United States as an ally. They no longer see the United States as a trusted partner, a trusted trade partner, and they aren't going to make any friendly deals at all. So Ralph, I ask you, what kind of benefit do we get out of that? Because people are really angry at us.
Well, they may be angry at us for now, but they can always change their minds. I mean, it's everything is fluid. We really just don't know what the end result is going to be because no one has changed the status quo up the way that Trump has. So you got to just look up objectively at the end of the 90 days and see what's actually been accomplished, what kind of trade deals, what kind of investment is actually coming into the United States,
Mm.
starting from the Middle East. For the companies that I laid out who have committed to putting money in to investment in the United States.
There's been a lot of reporting about all of Trump's other initiatives, and gee whiz, I mean, it just his policies on immigration and migration and the Constitution and due process and habeas corpus and dismantling the government and his America First thing, his Manifest Destiny thing. And Jeff, I want to ask you: do you see any relationship between his tariff policy that we've been discussing with you and Ralph and all of these other initiatives that he floods the zone with on a daily basis? Is there a relationship here?
Absolutely. I think there's a direct correlation. This is Donald Trump, the would be king, the would be person who sees himself as America, not anyone else. His small cult, which unfortunately is now taken over at least half of the US federal government, and they're all related. It's America first. Boy, when's the last time we heard that expression? Maybe before World War I. We have alienated virtually every single ally. We have alienated countries now in the last few elections. Canada, the last election in Europe, the liberal candidate who was way behind came by to win. And the foreign press says it was a Trump reason why these people won. It's about time they said that we stop kowtowing to this man. And so, yeah, the tariffs are simply one part of, if it's not America and if it's not what I think America should be, it doesn't deserve to exist.
Okay, let's go to sort of closing statements. We're out of time. So Ralph, would you say that up to this point, and Jeff makes the calculation at about 60 days right now, but it could be more or less. It's not yet 90. Would you say at this point we have any indication that there's a success in this policy? That there are indications that we will improve world trade, we will improve the national economy, we will improve our call it our trading relations, our diplomatic relations with all the countries on which Trump has imposed these tariffs. Would you say it's a success?
Well, I think the market's very fluid. I think his trip to the Middle East was a success. Even some of Biden's people have commended Trump on what he was able to achieve in terms of the commitment for the foreign investment into the United States. I think getting China to come to the negotiating table a second time was a big achievement. But at the end of the day, there has to be the results, the trade deals, the money coming into the United States, benefiting the American people in the heartland, which is what Trump said he was going to do when he ran a second time as a candidate.
Farmers are complaining bitterly that he has destroyed their crops. It's not only this, it's the destruction of USAID, but suffice to say, there are some industries that have taken hits and that people are closing retail operations, closing manufacturing operations. They can't operate farms anymore. I mean, so far on that level in the domestic area, doesn't seem to me that there's been any success, rather a failure and a destruction. What are your thoughts about that, Ralph?
There's commitment from companies to invest in the United States, into manufacturing, into Indiana, Kentucky, Ohio, into the heartland. As you said, Trump feels it's short-term pain for long-term gain. That's what Trump is running. That's what he believes is going to be the ultimate result. Is that it's going to be a windfall for the American people once these trade deals are consummated. Once money starts flowing back into the United States, and people feel like they are prospering.
Okay.
If they
Well,
don't,
but my question is, has there been a success so far?
well, I think I answered that in terms of what he's been able to do so far. You have to look at the end of the 90 days and see what is going to happen.
Okay.
Uh,
Let me ask you this, Ralph. Last question to you
okay.
is what should the American public and the viewers of this program, what would you advise them to take away from it? How should they be feeling about this? Where does it fit in their view of the Trump administration?
Well, I think the viewers, were well aware of what Trump was going to do because this is what he ran on. It's not a surprise to me that he imposed all these tariffs, and then he was going to, in effect, dismantle some of these government agencies because that's what he campaigned on. So it was never a surprise to me, and I think to most people. I think it's a shock because no one has changed the status quo or attempted to change the status quo in the way that he has. So it's created a lot of consternation and a lot of instability and lack of predictability. At the end of the day, the markets want predictability. People want to know that they're going to be living in a safe and secure society, that they're going to be able to create a better opportunities for their children.
Ralph, one question I forgot to ask you is that in all of this, Trump never imposed any tariffs on Russia. And most recently, he withdrew from any effort at trying to create a peace between Ukraine and Russia. And he says, it's their problem, not my problem. I'm not going to do anything else. And that was part of his platform. That was part of his promise. And I know that probably no direct connection, but the fact is that he did not include any tariffs on Russia in his Rose Garden presentation. Can you explain that?
I can't explain Trump. No, no, to try and explain or predict what Trump's going to do. I mean, he's very unpredictable. I think at the end of the day, you're talking about bringing Russia to the negotiating table. They're going to have to impose strict sanctions on the oil and gas and the banking industry to bring Putin to the negotiating table with Zelensky. I'm not the only person that has suggested that.
But they haven't done anything up till now, except squeeze a rare earth agreement out of Zelensky. Let me close with Jeff here. Jeff, your thoughts, your final thoughts, your suggestions to people, and I guess I'm really interested in where this fits in the Trump administration. Has he done us any favors so far? Is it likely that this is going to result in some success, even though it's hard to find any success so far? And what is your response to Ralph in terms of how we should see this?
When Trump ran, he said he would end the war in the Ukraine and end the war in Gaza in 1 week. And as far as I know, things are worse now than they've ever been. So that'll tell you a little bit about Trump's ability to force people to do things. He has none, but he doesn't understand that. You cannot compete, we're getting back to tariffs, by penalizing and threatening. And that's all he's done, including today. Threats and penalty. You might get away with it in an island that only has seals, but you're not going to get away with it in countries like Japan and Korea. And by the way, the whole argument that this is the only way to get manufacturing back to the US, how many factories have Japanese and Korean companies opened up in the US in the last 10 years? How many thousands of jobs have they brought to the United States with no tariffs? And how about China? They're investing billions in the United States. It's another whole argument about what they're doing about buying up farms and buying up companies. There are no tariffs. Why are they coming to the US to invest? If the theory is, unless we put a huge tariff on, now, I'll finish this way. Will he get a 5% tariff or a 10% tariff, which he probably could have gotten from the first day just by being friendly and negotiating the way countries, except Russia, negotiates? Probably. So what's he going to tell the American people? Well, Trump will say, hey, I got a 10% tariff out of France on your champagne. It could have been 100%. So to me, again, I get back to it. It's all illusory. It's all bluster. It's all waking up in the middle of the night and posting stuff that he's not had any knowledge about, hasn't talked to anybody about. And yet, 90 days, Ralph, he may announce a few tariff deals, but remember where he started: 135 tariff deals.
We're out of time. Got to go.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Ralph Winnie, an international trade lawyer in Washington. Jeff Portnoy, a very Akamai international follower here in Honolulu, a lawyer also. We'll leave it there. Thank you so much to Ralph and Jeff. I'm Jay Fidell, host of Global Connections. We've been discussing the tariff deals Trump has made. Thanks so much to our viewers for watching. We'll see you again soon for the next one. Aloha.